Hello everyone and welcome to this week's video tutorial on architectural diagramming using Adobe Illustrator. Last week we looked at generating some diagrams, how they work, how they're used in architectural practice, be that competitions, panel layouts, or as a student trying to present your concepts. One of those particular diagram types we looked at was, of course, the concept diagram and how to get across our ideas very quickly and succinctly. That's what we're going to be looking at here while we learn Adobe Illustrator, and we're going to create some diagrams like these. For those of you doing the assignment, you'll see that we have 8 diagrams required for your case study. So here are my 8 diagrams for the house Ruckers Hill by Studio Bright. I've got 3 plan diagrams. I've got an elevation diagram, a section diagram, another elevation diagram, an axonometric diagram, and a perspective diagram. So I've tried to give a good breadth of the example of different diagrams we might use in architectural practice and as students, and give you some examples looking at one of the case studies as well. Okay, so Adobe Illustrator. The most important thing to understand is that Adobe Illustrator is very different to Photoshop. Common trap for students is they think that they can do all of their drawings in Photoshop, but what you don't realize is that Photoshop is a pixel-based software. Illustrator is a vector software. So what that means is in Illustrator, I can zoom and zoom and zoom and zoom and zoom forever, and I still have nice, crisp, sharp lines. In Photoshop, because they are immediately converted to pixels, if you do any zooming or in or out, you're going to immediately have blurred lines. If you change your image from digital to print, i.e. plot to PDF from Photoshop, immediately goes to pixels and you'll lose the definition of your lines. So pretty much the worst thing you can do for architectural diagrams is to affect the line weights. As you can see here, having crisp and clean line weights is really how we read architectural diagrams. Having these thick edges around each of these diagrams tells us what to look at. So Photoshop is really not the right software for this. We have to use Adobe Illustrator so that we can give that control. So Adobe Illustrator, quite similar in setup to many of the Adobe platforms in that we have tools over here on our left edge. When something is active, it changes the toolboard up the top. It's kind of like the Properties tab. What we see up here is based on what we have selected at any one time. Over here on the right-hand side, we have all of our panels, similar to AutoCAD. Got our layers set up, properties, other things that we might need. Now, I want to go ahead and set up your screen so it looks like mine. So let's go over to Windows, Workspace, and then I'm going to reset Essentials Classic so it looks like mine, or you can just go Windows, Workspace, Essentials Classic. Now, the setup for Essentials Classic is a good start in the top and the left edge, but the right hand edge isn't really doing what we need to do. So first thing, I'm going to get rid of this edge over here. Just going to drag each one of these off and cross them out. They're not really useful to us. So we'll get rid of all of those and then we'll set you up for the stuff you'll need for your architectural setup. Get rid of that. Some of these we're going to bring back, but I want them all to be in the one panel rather than 2 separate panels. So we're going to chuck them all over there. Let's go over to Windows, type character. Character is essential for setting up your text and your typeface and getting everything looking nice. Next one we want is Windows stroke. So we need stroke. That's how we control our line weights. I'm going to go over to show options underneath the stroke tab, and that way I'll be able to see what's going on over here. If I have this line selected, I can see it's a 1-point line, it's not dashed, no arrowheads yet. If I change over to this one here, I can see it is dashed and it does have some arrowheads active, so I've got a lot of control with my stroke tab. Add some more in. Let's go to Pathfinder. It's another one we want. It's a very good tool for architectural drawings. I'm going to chuck it up here. It allows you to join things together, much like you would in AutoCAD, to separate certain elements. So if you had a square over the top of a circle and you wanted to cut the circle out of the square, you could use this to cut one from the other. Very helpful. And then lastly, we want to add our layers tab in, much like in AutoCAD. I'll put this one down here, and I can see that Illustrator has imported all of my layers from CAD to help keep things nice and clean. All right, so that's our setup for Illustrator. We can see everything's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and show you what some of these tools on the left-hand side do. So our selection tool and our quick selection tool, very similar to the right to left select versus the left to right select in AutoCAD. You know, when you select right to left, it selects everything. If you select left to right, it's just certain elements. Same thing, kind of. So selection tool, or V, the shorthand command, brings up this black arrow. And so if I select things, it will select everything that that element is touching. And if I do any edits, it'll affect everything there, right? So Command Z to undo that. If instead I select A, or my direct selection tool, it will only impact the specific thing that I'm touching. So now you can see I can edit just this one part of the shape. So quite powerful in this selection process. Gives you a lot of ability there to make changes quickly. Another one which is very helpful is the pen tool. So I can create whatever shape I need to, and then drag that over the top of the drawing or diagram. If I wanted to make this fill here, I could do that very quickly with the pen tool, or this shape here, or some of the trees, whatever I needed to do, I can do that very quickly with the pen tool. The beauty of the pen tool is that it creates both a fill and a stroke. So the difference between a fill and a stroke can be easily summarized by looking at a person. So let's go ahead. I'm going to click down here and just make some edits to make this nice and clear for you. So at the moment, if I make my person really big, we can see that this person is just an outline. If I put them over the top of things, I can see what's underneath the person. If I change from a stroke to a fill by clicking this swap fill and stroke button, I can see that it's now filled up everything on the inside. So a fill is the inside of a closed line. A stroke, if I copy that over and swap it again, is just the outer edge. So Illustrator is effectively made up of fills and strokes. Playing with things like this pool here, this is a fill, and the lines around it are all strokes. And the power that we have over those, the control over we have over these elements, gives us our architectural diagram. So a pen tool is great because it creates both for us at once. So if I wanted this shape to be a stroke, which it is at the moment, that's great. If I want to swap it over, it's now a fill. So I've got both in the pen tool. Whereas if you come down to here, the line segment tool, it's only going to create lines in space. Okay, so if I change the stroke to black, I can see those lines have popped up now, but I can't then change them to a fill because they're not a closed-in box. So that's the difference between the two there, the line segment tool and the pen tool. So one will give you just lines, the other will give you both. But sometimes all you need is a line. Might need to add another line to this pool, for example, just to add one more step, and you can do that quite easily there. Now, another very useful tool is the Eyedropper tool, the Eyedropper copy tool, which is this one down here, or I for shorthand. So if I click I, it's going to open up the Eyedropper tool for me. I can then select this line weight here, and it's going to immediately copy that for me. So that's a very, very useful tool. Now, another example of the Eyedropper tool, if I come back up to this fill over here, hit I again, I can change this fill to any one of these colors. I could change it to this tree, which is this dashed outline. I could change it to this thick, heavy outline, whatever I want. So it really speeds up the process using the Eyedropper tool, because it means once you get one diagram looking good or a few lines looking the way you want, you can use the Eyedropper tool to very quickly make sure everything else is working. Of course, we've got things like the text tool, and then over in our character settings that we did before, we can make some changes to the type, face, the size, the spacing, all of those things, lots of control there in the text. We've got our standard rectangle tool, or if we right click on that, it'll open up everything else in there. Ellipse tool gives us a circle, or ellipses, of course. So there are quite a few tools over there on that edge. Now, much like dealing in CAD and we're dealing paper space, Illustrator is also directly dealing in paper space. We've got a specific page size called an artboard. So if we come down to the artboard tool or Shift O, we can make some changes. So I can see that we're in a landscape artboard and my page size is currently this random series of numbers because I brought these drawings in from AutoCAD. So you can very quickly change those to an A3 size, 420 by 297, and that would give you your page size. So you know that the way this looks here is how it's going to look when it's printed out, or how it's going to look when it's PDF'd as well. So you've got that control there too. A few other tools that you can have a play around with, got gradient tools, other tools as well. Now let's talk about selection. So say we've got a ellipse tool like this. If I just have it pulling on my mouse, then it's going to take any shape. If I hold down Shift instead, it will lock it in so that it's always going to be a circle. If I also hold down Alt as well as Shift, it will come in and out from the center point. And this is effectively the same set of rules we use for any of our scaling that we might do inside this space. So if I wanted to make this a little bit bigger, if I just pull on the corner with my V selection tool active, I'm going to warp the scale and it's going to mess up my diagram. So I need to always make sure I'm holding Shift if I'm doing any scaling. That way it's going to stay to scale, and it's also going to scale the line weights proportionally as well, which is what we want out of our vector software. Same again, if I hold Alt while holding Shift as well, I can make things bigger or smaller from the center point of that image. Very, very helpful tool. So that is our selection tools and everything that we've got going on over there. So now we understand some of the basics of Illustrator and the tools and the setup and the layout. Let's have a talk about how we get to this point of the nice series of architectural diagrams. So you may think that it would be wise to do your drawing directly in Illustrator, but to me that's just a waste of efficiency. The fastest thing to do would be to do our drawings as much as possible in AutoCAD, because we've already got the plan, we've already got the elevation, we've already got the axis, the perspective. All of that stuff is already drawn for us in AutoCAD. So the better option to do, as you see here, is I've created a new file called Studio Bright Diagrams, and I've gone ahead and I've made edits and changes to my plans, elevations, sections, axis, perspective diagrams so that they're ready to go into Illustrator. So as we talked about last week, you want to delete everything that you don't need out of the drawing. So this is that main drawing we were looking at last week. We know that this one is about the two courtyards, dual courtyards being bound by the house at the center, right? So the bounding is done by this outline that I've created, and all I did was just use a polyline tool to draw a boundary around the house where I wanted it. And then I deleted, if I delete that, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. I deleted everything else from the architectural floor plan, right? And immediately that gives clarity to our plan so that when we jump in, all of those lines are ready. All I needed to do was edit the line weights and add some fills in. Next one here, this is looking at a diagram of Studio Bright's concept of having a single color in some of these important moments throughout the house. So if I jump over to here, this is Studio Bright's website, you can see I've got this beautiful pink bathroom in here, and this green aqua blue bathroom there. If I go over to some of the other images, you'll see I've got this beautiful aqua pool color. So these moments of creating essential experience are created by creating a lot, by using one core color and really emphasizing that experience. So that's really what we've done here in this diagram, saying this is the pink bathroom, this is the aqua bathroom, this is the pool tiles, this is that one timber used everywhere, and this is the green from the curtains inside the TV room. So that was a moment of intense color, which we've got here. So all I did in this diagram was to delete out everything except for these rooms. And then I just made sure that I put a nice clean polyline around each of those so that I'd be able to bump up the line weight on those ones later. The next one, I noticed in the plan form that every time we had a transition from one important space to another, a curve was used or a filleted line was used to emphasize this transition. So we've got this curve here at the front entry, this curve paving stone, this curve line at the threshold from exterior to interior. We've got these curved steps which go from this little moment of pause room into the final TV room. So the curve became a really important element to emphasize transition and threshold throughout the space and between spaces. So again, I've deleted everything except for those moments. So I've just kept a few little bits and pieces like some trees and the paving, this little set of chairs and the TV furniture here. That way I know what I'm looking at. It's not just an arbitrary shape in Illustrator. But again, less is more. You want to keep as little as possible when you get through that. I've got a diagram here which talks about the arches being used as a transition between the resting places, the sleeping quarters, and the living quarters over this side. And they also allow permeability between the two spaces, courtyards, which are the pool and the garden courtyard as well. Next one was a section diagram which talked about how landscape was used as a threshold or barrier between different exterior spaces. So you'll notice that you can't step right up to the edge of this upper wall, which faces the street. They use a garden to create distance between that. Same here. You can't step right up to this courtyard. There's a garden, there's a buffer zone there. And then also in these arches, in each one of these, as a buffer between the two courtyards, there's also some leafy greens growing in each one of those arches as well. So garden was very much used to create permeability and to create a buffer or a barrier between the two. In some of the images in Studio Bright on the streetscape, you can see that while there is this new building going on over here and the arch transition hallway between and the existing building here, there was one common material used to connect the two together. So I wanted to create a diagram that emphasizes on this main street frontage, we are tying these two spaces together so that it doesn't look like two separate elements of architecture. In fact, these are one. So we have this element of material there. Next one was my axo diagram. If you look around the plans of Studio Bright, you'll see that at key moments of pause where we want to stop, that's given a framed view. So when we stop in the kitchen, we get this beautiful full bleed view out to the garden. When we enter this arrival space, we get framed by this view as we come into this hallway. We have these arches that frames our view left and right to the pool or the garden courtyard. In this room up here, the reading room, we have a portal window that looks out over the top of this space. We have this little study that sits at the corner here with these two beautiful views out. And then over here at this side, we have another portal window looking out here to this courtyard and out to the street. So the axo really was telling us about these view planes that open up. And then finally, there's this very special moment in the Studio Bright house. And clearly the clients really valued the time that they had together with their kids and their family. And the living space was very, very important to them because that's where they shared that time together. And you could tell because there's a lot more detailing and fine craft going on in that living space and in that transition. We've got these beautiful sweeping curved steps. We've got this curving wall that brings the eye in. We've got this hanging floating staircase, similar to something Peter Zumthor would do. We've got these beautiful green curtains that wrap the room up nice and snug if we want to watch a movie together, and the skylight that sits over the top of this couch, and then this material that kind of wraps all the way around us and holds us tight. It's clearly a very special moment in the house. So a perspective image to summarize that as well. So from that discussion there, you've heard from me, these are the concepts that I've taken away from this case study. Of course, your interpretation of your own case study is up to you. And that's what we want to see based on your research and looking at their websites, their books, journals, videos, whatever it might be for you. Think about what the concepts are of their house, and then think about, like we talked about last time, what are the best drawings to do that? So for these concepts here, they were plan. Plan was the best for those. These two, top and bottom, elevation worked well for them. Section works really nice talking about barriers and thresholds. When we've got a whole bunch of views looking in different directions, AXO works really nicely. And when we want to look at something a little bit romantic or poetic, a nice perspective, a one-point perspective, you can see all going over to this same vanishing point. Looks really nice to bring that together as well. So I have thought about what is the best drawing type. I've deleted everything I don't want. I've put some polylines or hard lines around the key things that I want to show and talk about. If there's any line work, i.e. some arrows and things that show movement, or this one over here, I've got these view lines coming out over here. Anything that you feel like you're going to need in the next phase in Illustrator, you would then do that in AutoCAD. But remember, delete everything that you don't need. Okay, so now we're ready. We've got everything finished in AutoCAD. What we need to do is a save as, and we need to down save it to a 2010. So if you create an AutoCAD drawing 2018, Adobe Illustrator won't be able to read the vectors. It might come in, but it won't work properly, and you won't have the full amount of control, your layers, everything working smoothly. So you need to down save it to 2010. So I've already done that. I don't want to overwrite that one, so I'm going to just say extension 2010 and save. I can see that saved there. Go back over to Illustrator, and I'm going to go Control New to make a new page. I'm just going to go 500 by 350. You can make an A3 page, which is 42297. All right, so I've got that Studio Bright diagram extension drawing saved down to 2010. If I drag and drop that over to Illustrator, it's going to ask you if you want to bring it in original size or to scale to fit the artboard. It's very important that you click scale to fit artboard, because otherwise, remember, we were drawing at 1:1. That's going to try and make a 20, 30, 50, 100 meter long building fit into Illustrator at 1:1 scale. And it's very much going to crash your computer. So always click scale to fit artboard when you're bringing it in. Otherwise, it's going to make a mess. So I click OK. It'll usually take a little while. I've got a pretty fast computer, so it's not too long for me, but don't be too disheartened if it's taking quite a while for you to load. Once it has loaded and it's got all your layers in, it should be working pretty well after that. If you find it is too laggy and too slow, what I do recommend you do is go back into AutoCAD and create a separate AutoCAD file for each one of your diagrams, your 8 diagrams. And that way you'll be able to bring them into Illustrator one at a time, and it will save some of your computer, some processing and graphics power, make your life a bit easier. All right, so once we've got our diagrams in Illustrator, we can see it's brought in all the colors, brought in all the layers, line weights are all in place as well. So we need to make some edits so that we can see what we're doing. First things first is we want to make everything black. So we hit Command A, Control A to select everything. And I'm going to come over to here to my stroke file, and I'm going to hit black. And then I'll click out of that. Click out to the side, and we can see it's made everything except for this green element over here black. And that's because I only changed the stroke. So I want to come over to what's green here, hold down Shift to select multiple items, and now I'm going to change that one to black as well. Right. Now, if you don't have anything here in your stroke tab when you're trying to change it to black, there might be nothing there. You can always just come down to here and double click on the stroke tab, select color, drag it all the way down to the bottom, click OK, and it will do the same thing and make it black for you as well. So that's another option if you find that your Illustrator didn't import the colors for you. So I can see I've got all my lines here now. I've got some heavier, some lighter. Illustrator's tried its best to understand what AutoCAD was saying, but not all of the line weights are the way we want them to be. So I'm going to do a bit of a quick fix now, and then we can do some more editing in a second. So First one is to go to 0.15 in our stroke. And that's, you'll find that an A3 page is a pretty good line weight for most of your background stuff. So we're selecting everything, which will mean all of the background stuff gets converted over to a 1.5, and then we'll go back in and we'll layer in at a heavier line weight the things that we want to see. So if I click out of that now, I can see, okay, everything's at a pretty similar level. I can see all my lines. I then want to go over to my first diagram. Now I'm just going to move this one over, give myself a bit of room. So remember V for your select everything tool. And let's just work on this one diagram for now. Okay, so remember I want to have this outer edge nice and thick because this diagram is all about showing these two elements of house hugging these two dual courtyards. So 0.15 ain't going to work for that. So I'm going to bump this all the way up to 1. And now I can see immediately that's really starting to resonate with that space. Then I've got a few more lines I need to edit. Now I want some of these walls to look a little bit thicker as well. So I'm going to do a few little edits here and selecting some of these spaces. So I could go one by one and select them and then make some changes to the line weights there. Or, because remember, Illustrator kept our line weights, I can jump over to the Layers tab here and select just the things I want to edit. So I'm going to go over to my Walls tab. If I click this circle here in my Layers tab next to Walls, Illustrator will automatically select everything on the drawing that has walls as its layer. Very, very helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and try 0.7. Yeah, that's pretty good. Maybe not so much because I still want that outer house to stand out. So let's go 0.5. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Okay. Next one we want to do is, I want these trees to read as dashed lines. So let's select all of these tree canopies. It is a dashed line, but because it got brought in and scaled down, the dashes have gone a bit funny. So dashed is selected, which is good. I then want to go 2 by 2, and let's see what that looks like. That looks great. Okay. That's looking really good. I can see my trees, they look nice and clear. Even if I zoom out to this sort of scale, I can still see they're dashed. That looks pretty good. I want them to be a little thicker though, because remember this concept that we're looking at in this diagram is all about the garden. So we'll jump back over to stroke over here. I'm going to bump them up to, let's try 0.5. Beautiful, that looks nice. Okay, now I want to add some color into this. Remember the steps? We're hardlining, then we're going to add some color. So I just want color to go inside this area here. Now, like we talked about before, we can use the pen tool. We can go over the top of this and figure out bit by bit where it is. That's one way to do it, but I want to do it faster and more efficient. So I'm going to select everything here in this zone to play with. Then I hit K for the paint bucket tool, and I'm going to come down over here to the fill color. I'm going to change it to blue. So I've double clicked on fill color. I want kind of a bluey aquary color, a little bit on the green side. That's too green. Somewhere like that is pretty nice. Now if I click inside here, I can see that's looking pretty good. It's filled up everything inside there. Then I want to give the illusion that this is getting deeper as we go in. So I want to get a little bit darker every time I click one of these. That's got the next step. A little bit darker again. I'm going diagonally across to the right. And then double click again, diagonally across to the right. I've got my pool there. Nice. So I can hit V, which goes back to my quick select tool, and that finishes off the command. That's looking pretty good as my pool. I like that one a lot. All right, let's try and do the same thing again for my garden here. I want to get all of this stuff inside here looking nice and green to represent a garden. Not bright green that it looks a bit gross, just a nice sort of garden foresty green. Okay, so let's grab a yellowy green that's a bit more natural. And I want to make it a little bit grey green, more of an olive kind of green. Okay, I'm happy with that. I then click inside, click OK, merge paint group, live paint button. And as much as I keep on trying, it's not letting me do anything. Now, this is because we've already merged some of these lines together when we hit K before and made our pool. So what it's telling us when we try this, if you want to merge the paint, you've got to click Merge Live Paint button. So what it's telling us is some of these lines have already been taken over. If you want to be able to edit those lines again, you need to merge them together with what you've currently got selected. So I head up to here and I click Merge Live Paint, and now you'll find that I can actually edit those elements. And much like a fill in AutoCAD, it will only select inside closed boundaries as well. I hit V to finish, and I can see that is now looking pretty good. I've got my green for my courtyard there. I've got my pool looking good there. I know I'm going to do some text in a second. So let's do some edits. Now, if I click on my diagram, I see I've got these weird, they look kind of like a Union Jack, like an English flag, instead of my normal. If I go over to this diagram, I select this one. I've got my toggle boxes that give me infinite control, do what I want to do with that. Now, I need to make some changes here because something's not quite right, and I can't actually select individual lines anymore. Everything's locked together. So what we need to do, select everything, come up to Object, Expand, and then click OK. Make sure those are all selected. Basically what it's doing is it's now going to separate everything back out into its original components. So now if I double click on these elements a few times, because it's grouped together, I can see that I can once again edit these as individual elements. If you want them to be editable the first time, so you don't have to double click all the way through, you just need to do some ungrouping. So Command Shift G or Control Shift G a few times, keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it, and eventually you'll get to where everything's ungrouped again. And now everything is once again editable, all of these lines. So we've now got a good looking diagram and it is editable. Next thing we want to do is add some text. So I go over to here, hit text. It's going to do some auto text for me, but I've got my own ideas. So what do we want to call this one? Let's say dual courtyards, water and garden are bound by the living and rest quarters, something like that. Actually, let's make that a little bit more efficient. The house bounds dual courtyards, garden and water. That's nicer. Remember, we want to be as efficient as possible with our text when it comes to diagrams. We want the drawing to do the talking. Now, the standard text that comes with Illustrator is very average. I have a specific text that I use in my business, Futura, which is great. Helvetica comes with most Macs. There's lots of different fonts out there. As a general rule, you want something that sits pretty light on the page and something that has an editable font family that goes from light through to heavy, something like that. So I like to chuck it on light and go about 10 size, center it, and then that will sit nice and subtle underneath my diagram there, which looks pretty good. Okay, great. So that same step-by-step process is very similar to for these diagrams as well. So we would grab an edge. I've already got my line weight set up now, so I can just copy. I can use the K tool, which is of course the live paint bucket, to edit each one of the fills inside here to add the color. So that one's nice and easy. Let's have a look at this one here, where we want to now emphasize these lines here as our motion lines, as our pathway lines. So I've got these shapes here, which are our curved elements. Remember, we were talking about curves being the transition and threshold between space. So these are the most important elements here. So I'm going to bump these up to 1. So we know that these are our focus. Our trees, I'm going to copy these trees over here. So we've got them. Actually, I think trees are going to get in the way of this diagram. So I'm going to delete them. Not necessary right now. And you need to be strong in the way that you put together your diagrams and delete everything that isn't necessary. I want to articulate these circulation lines, so I'm going to give them a color now instead of giving the architecture a color. A bright orange or a nice blue typically looks quite good. We need to bump the line weights up though. Let's go to 0.7. And I want to add a dash to these, so I come over to my stroke while it's selected, go dash line. Remember 2 by 2 looks pretty good. That looks great. So let's copy all of these lines over, hold down shift to select multiple. I for eyedropper. Now we've copied all of those, that looks good. I want to add an arrow to each one of these so I can see the circulation. So select the line again, over to the stroke box, come down to arrowhead. Number 11 is the architectural arrow. That looks good. Do that for each one of these. Great. And 1, 2 more. There we go. We can see now what we're talking about. Then we can bring this text down. Hold down Alt while we drag it so that we create a copy. And we've now got our diagram there. We change that text to talk about how the curves play a role in the threshold. Okay, so that's another diagram done there. All right. Now we want to have a look at what do we want to do next. Let's do our elevation one. Why not? So sometimes when you bring in fills from AutoCAD, some strange lines will come across. That's just because it's trying to bring over all of the shapes that we've been looking at. So I don't actually need this outer edge line or underneath. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this. So I double clicked on that a few times to isolate it. Now I've deleted it. So we don't need that anymore. The case study that I'm looking at has actually quite a nice gray-brown color to its bricks. So I'm going to change over that. Well, that's way too yellow. Let's go a little bit darker, something like that. More of a mushroomy color. That looks cool. It's a little heavy though, so I'm going to bump this down again. Yeah, maybe not so much. 0.1. Great, that looks good. You can now see these arches sitting separate from what's going on over there. These are meant to be gray elements to represent the concrete, so black is a little too harsh. I'm going to change my fill. Now I can see I don't have a gray there, so like I said before, come down to fill, double click on that one. I'm going to make it gray. There we go, like that edge. Now I want to bump up my bottom and my top here so that they read the same as the other thick lines. So let's bump those up to 1. That's looking good. And 1. That's looking good. Okay. So, and this will happen a few times as you're working, again, because we're dealing with a lot of hatches and things now inside this space. So zoom back in. Now I want to add some people into this space. So remember we talked a few weeks ago about adding people into our models. All we need to do is go into Google and type in CAD block people free, and we can download some people, which I've done here already. So I'm going to open up these people. Illustrator, here he is. Give it a bit of time, or I will drag and drop it in instead. Where's he gone? Okay, there he is. He's hiding over the corner of my sheet. So I've got my person here. Now in diagrams, you don't need all of this extra fluff on your people and trees and things. So I tend to just err on the side of grab the outline only and then bring that into the space. So I've got him, his outline, it's already copied, so I can get rid of that. Come back into here, Control V. Wow, he is way too big, as we can see. And he's also got a fill over the top, so I'm going to change that to none by clicking on this little strike through here. And I'm going to scale him all the way down. I know this space is roughly about this height there. That's good. And then I'm going to invert him so that he's a silhouette. And then I'm going to come up to here and opacity, and I'm going to change his opacity to 50 so that I can lay him over the top of some architectural elements, and we'll still see that behind, which gives a really nice effect. I can see the brickwork and this other stuff coming through over the top of that. Right, so that illustrates what's going on there. We can throw some more people to illustrate the permeability like we saw on my diagrams before, and that's looking good for now. All right, so let's jump down to the section one. This section one we just looked at using trees that we already had in AutoCAD. Now I can just show you over here to save us a little bit of time. So what I did was I just grabbed the tops of some of the trees and then I just played around with the colors and copied them over. So you can see that this one's more of a green, we've got a lime and a more of a yellow, and then we just chuck some purple in as well. And what that does is it illustrates the landscape, but when you're looking at it at this sort of scale, it just reads as vegetation, so you don't have to worry about it being too cringy. All right, let's put that one back in there. Okay, so again, that effect comes from bumping up the line weights. If we jump into here, go 1, you can select all of these elements of the section line, bump that up to 1, and we'll get that nice heavy effect there. All right, and coming down to this elevation diagram here, this is all about this material and texture tying these two places together. So I want that to really stand out. I'm going to change this to more of a yellowy mushroom color that we see on the site. That looks good. I then want to grab this outer edge, but you can see because this hatch is in the front, I can't grab that individual line without zooming all the way to it. So what I need to do is I need to first grab the hatch. I can see the layer that it's on is this one because it's got this little arrow there. I'm going to lock that layer. Then I should be able to grab the line that's behind it. If I use the up arrows, yep, I can see I've got that line now. So now I can make my edits to this line. I want to make that size 1 point so it really stands out. Good, that looks great. Then I want to add another line under here for this line. I want this point here to this point here to look as thick as what's going on there. So what I need to do is drag this line, hold down Alt and Shift so that it makes a copy of the line. I'm then going to use my line tool to create some lines here that intersect from those 2 points. Then I'm going to select the line, and we're going to do a little bit of a trim just like in AutoCAD, but we're going to use the cut tool, which is C for cut. It does effectively the same thing. So I've got this line selected. I come here to C, cut, and I go over to the next intersection point, which is here, the intersect. Great. So now I can delete these lines that are on the outer edge. Ooh, and you can see it doesn't want me to do that. So I've got another way I can do this now because those are connected points. What I can do is I can come up to my point here and add another anchor point, which is there. I can see there's an anchor point. That's good. I can then go to delete anchor point, and I hit this one over here, and voila, comes back to the same point. So sometimes the cut tool won't work for you on certain lines. You can use the delete anchor point tool, which sits underneath the pen. So if you right click, it will show you the delete anchor point tool. Okay, escape and hit V to go back in. I want to get rid of these construction lines that I don't need. Select those, delete, and then go and hold shift and drag this back up to where it snaps into place. And then I'm going to bump that up to 1 as well so that that looks like the others. Great. And we can see now that this is really standing out as the primary element. I can see in this diagram that this is the thing that we're talking about, which is, of course, the point of the diagram. All right, so say we want to work on our axo. And as we remember before from our axo drawings, having that hard line edge really celebrates the drawing and shows off the axo. So let's create a bit more space here. I'm going to come down to the Artboard tool. Okay, now we've got our axo. Now I know that these trees have got a lot of stuff going on, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the trees off for a bit so I can do some editing without my rainbow wheel going crazy every 10 seconds. So if I select the tree, I can see this little guy's going off here, which tells me the trees are on this layer. I'm going to turn those off. Wow, that's much better, and I can zoom in and out easily. So I want to use my pen tool and draw over this to create an outer edge, but what we'll find happens if I start using my pen tool, right click on the pen tool to go back to pen. If I start drawing over the top of this, it's not letting me do any drawing because there's already lines where I want to do the drawing on that layer. So what we need to do first is to create a new layer, which is this layer 25. I want that to be at the top so I can see what I'm doing. So drag that all the way to the top, layer 25. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lock down everything, much like we're in AutoCAD, so that the things underneath my axo aren't going to interrupt me while I'm trying to do my drawing. So we go lock all of these down, lock. Okay, so now I'm going to lock the trees as well. Now, if I use my pen tool and I'm on layer 25, I should be able to draw over the top, beautiful, of my drawing. Let's go out to here. Whoop, zoomed out too much. Up to there. Still got rainbow wheel because we've got a lot of textures going on. I'll try not to zoom in and out too much. And then we'll go around. I'm going to get a lot of rainbow wheel, I think. So what I might do is pause it and you'll see the finished product in just a second. Voila, and there we go. Magic of pausing. All right, now we've already got some arrows that we were pretty happy with before. So what we need to do now is just unlock all of these layers so we can go back to having full control of our drawing. We'll go back through very quickly. And then I want to copy over the arrows that I had over here that I was already happy with. So if we select all of these lines first, get all of these. Then we Eyedropper Tool, I for that one. I copy that and I can see I've now got these nice arrows. Same thing as we did before. I want to have an arrow coming out of each one of these. So I'll go over to arrowheads under my stroke tool 11. That's looking pretty good. They're all pointing the right direction. And I also want to add one over the other side here. Great, now I can see what's going on there in these shapes. The last thing I want to do is add some dark gray into these elements here. So what we can do is use the K tool, much like we did before. So I'm going to select everything, hit K, jump over to here. I want dark-ish, but not too dark gray. Okay, to get started. And then I'll pause this again. And there we go. So finish the gray with the K, and then I've just turned my tree layers back on, and we've got our little bit of text there. So we can see really the same technique is used over and over again, back from where we started. We're bringing the drawing in, we're editing the outer line weight of whatever it is that we want to focus on, using the K tool, the live paint dropper tool, to add some fills, messing around with some of the dash lines, doing whatever we need to do, the line weights to make it look the right way, and then adding some text in as well. The very same principle applies to this last image that we've got here. So I've got some lines that I've emphasized because these are the key moments. I've then used the K tool to create this curtain, gone slightly darker on one edge. Same thing with this floating stairwell, slightly darker underneath to give some depth. And then I've just created this little box here that you can see, just using a pen tool. That is my shadow that sits under there so I can see it's floating. Once again, I've gone and used my pen tool to create this light. I've actually created shadow, but it still gives the impression of light over the top of this skylight coming down from there. I then use the brush tool, which is Shift B, to erase some of the edges, and that gets rid of the hard line of my pen tool. That's how I've got this nice soft sweeping curve that sits under there. So that's Shift B for that one. But the process is effectively the same, and so this is what you need to do for your diagram series. You need to first go into CAD, create a new file, make the exact drawings that you need using the imagery you already have, plan, section, elevation, perspective, axo, whatever it might be. Then save it as a 2010, bring it into Illustrator, make all the line weights 0.15 on an A3 sheet, usually looks pretty good, and then start layering in some thicker line weights using the K or live paint tool to add in color texture, bring some people in as silhouettes, some trees if they're needed, and just effectively tell us the story of your concept. And these little bits of text go to do that too. So diagrams, not that difficult, but extremely useful in architectural practice, both in competitions, in winning the client as well. That's it for now, and we'll see you guys very shortly. Thanks.